Hi everyone, my name is Mike Henry, and this is my Procreate 4.2 demo for the piece I call Fuzzball. So this was originally a sketch that went out when I did my Pink Hair Girls Kickstarter way back when. This is the rough of it, and this is where it eventually goes. I can't find the original photo anymore, so what you see here is the original photo jumping in, and then I cut it and do some real quick levels on it, just so that it gets a little bit clearer for painting purposes, and then I start drawing on top of it, just to get like I guess like the clearest possible version of the lines for me to start painting. Now when I originally did this sketch, since it was part of the Pink Hair Girls series, I sort of mentally had anticipated her having like a solid pink hair color, but when I wanted to do this, I had a completely different motivation for what I wanted to do with it. So right now we're just getting through the cleaning up of the lines, and then we'll get to the painting. Yeah, you can see here she's got kind of crazy eyes right now, but I knew that I would fix that in the painting process. The big thing that I wanted to do was I kind of wanted to have a more I don't really have a good word for it. I just sort of wanted more of like a true paint look, where it's almost like an acrylic paint look, especially in the hair, where the colors don't have a whole lot of blending going on. They're more just like these solid shapes, these colors that don't blend from one to the next, and that's what I end up doing for the hair. I also have been recently experimenting a lot more with using a brush that already sort of has a texture to it or has a look to it, and just sort of embracing that. If you follow my Instagram channel, whatever it's called, Instagram profile account, you've seen me post the Aunt Becky piece where she has like fur collar and fur cuffs on her coat, and that's all done by just adjusting a brush and then letting it do what it does. So this is just something that I've been, I guess, incorporating a little bit more lately. So the eyebrows that you see there, and then the hair that you see here, is all just done with specific brushes that Procreate already has built in. Now, which brushes are they? I don't remember. I believe in the calligraphy section is where these brushes come from. But if you've watched my videos before, you know that I don't really guide people towards specific brushes, and I don't encourage getting certain brushes just for their look. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, and I'm not saying that there isn't a reason to do that. It's just what I would rather encourage is more of a creative thinking around it, instead of thinking about like, oh, this artist used this brush, so I'm going to use that brush. Instead, try to think about maybe a look that you're going for and see if a brush can achieve that, or if you can make a brush that achieves that. So again, I'm not shitting on that. I'm just saying that I don't want to tell you guys I don't want to go back in and figure out the exact brush I used and then be like, go use that brush because it's going to do exactly what I did here, and then there's a expectation of what that's going to do. I would instead say, if you like the look of this, or you have a look in mind that you'd like to go for, experiment with tons of different things, tweak existing brushes, do whatever you want to try and get to that look, as opposed to just saying like, oh, okay, this artist uses this, so I'm going to use that. So at this point, you can see fairly standard. I mean, we've got that brush that's doing that hair look and feel for us, but otherwise this is all just my usual flatting process. Something that's interesting, of course, after seeing the end piece, is you can see here we've got a purple background with like yellow eyes, orangey yellow eyes, and by the time the whole thing is done, it's more of like a mustardy yellow type thing in the background, and same with her eyes. So in a second we'll see how that change goes. Eyes are something that I usually feel really comfortable painting, but for some reason with this piece I just was struggling like crazy with it. You see that I just repainted the white part of her eye a couple of times. We're on another version of the white part. Here you can see that I started painting the yellow orange iris for her, and then I started tweaking it already. So you can see that I'm struggling. I'm having an internal struggle with how my expectation is that I should be able to handle this, and how I'm actually handling this, and where the whole thing is going just isn't matching up with my expectations of my skill. This is what I call the I know I should be able to do this shit skill gap. It's where you Maybe you're even an artist who's known for being able to do something, and then you sit down to do that thing you're known for being able to do, or you're at the very least just super comfortable with something and you start doing it, and then you go, why can't I nail this? Why is this wrong? Why isn't it working out? And it's just a psychological thing. It's either you are doing it and you just are caught up in your process, or it's that you aren't doing it because you're just overthinking things and you're putting too much work into something that is actually really easy for you. So there you can see I adjusted the background color, and then I adjusted the eyes, and I had those two match up. I actually adjusted the eyes first, and then I brought the background color in line with the eyes, and then I put in the shines and the reflections and all that kind of stuff. It's not really a lot to talk about there. You can rewatch it if you want to see the order in which I did that, but it's the way I do eyes a lot of the time. So now we're into the hair. So what I do is I go back to that same brush that I used in order to create the flats for the hair, and I start with the shadows. The reason I start with the shadows, I think I've said this in past videos, is whenever I'm dealing with something that is in the is darker in value, I usually go midtones and then darks in order to give it structure, and then to lights. If I'm dealing with something lighter in value, I usually go midtones and then lights and then into darks to add the structure in later. And when I say structure, I just mean sometimes the darkness can give you like it just really puts its foot down and allows you to really establish the structure of the thing that you are rendering. And I find sometimes with the light that obviously can happen with the light, but I just feel like the dark is always the one that comes in and says like, no, this is what it looks like. So here we've got a mid-tone hair, we've got a dark value, we've got a lighter value than the mid-tone. And then here we're just going to add in sort of like another little a more saturated but only slightly brighter kick of highlight at the very top for where the light's coming in. And she's just lit top down, basically. Nothing particularly fancy with the way she's lit. So now we move from that grown out fuzzy shaved part of the back of her head to the distant lock of hair that's past her face. In the layer stack, that is of course the furthest back set of layers. Here in a second I realize that I scribble in wet acrylic because that's the brush that I end up using for the skin. So it's included in Procreate. There you go, right there. I just wrote wet acrylic, top down lighting, and that's what I use for that. I do use a little bit of a soft eraser in order to pull it back like I usually do, but I try to just go sort of straight in as much as possible. So as I said before, darker value things, I go from mid-tone to dark. Lighter value things, I go from mid-tone to light. And that's what you see happening here with me hitting the structure of her face from a light perspective first. Working with a brush like this is, of course, interesting because you get random things happening that sometimes you keep and sometimes you don't. I don't always work with that type of a brush, but when I do my best to try and keep the qualities of it present. But of course, I'm also a bit of a control freak, so I have to watch myself so that I don't over clean it up as I'm going through it. So now I've done the first value up from my mid-tone on her skin, and I'm going to the next one above that. She's very fair skinned, so she's mostly on the light side. And since I've got the head layers as their own grouping of layers, and I've got the body layer as what's going to be its own grouping of layers, I use the head as my proof of skin tone for the rest of it. Since the face usually, at least in the way that I do things, is going to have the most color variation because of the blush, or in this case like something like eyeshadow or lip color or whatever, it proves the most things out by doing the face and then going to the body. And when it's a tight crop like this, I have very little reason to include anything like the blush in the nose or the ears or the cheeks or whatever in the body, since we don't see things like hands and knees and toes and, you know, just areas where you might want to represent some of that blood underneath the skin. And now we're starting to work with a darker color, getting in the mouth details and the nostril details, and it'll just go from there into other sections as well. Here we have some ear definition going in, and then some above the eye definition to really pop that dimensions of that eyelid out and to sort of emphasize the eye socket as it goes back. Here we've got some shiny parts, some accents, in order to, as sort of like a last touch, to bring some extra shapes, or some shapes a little bit more extra forward, kind of thing. They will get lowered in opacity a little bit, but I paint them in white and then knock them back. So now we're doing the blush pass, still using the same brush so that I can try to maintain some consistency. And then here's the eyeshadow. I usually go for a little bit of a purple tint to the eyeshadow, but with this particular character, I felt that I wanted it to be more of that desaturated, smokier look that sort of matches more of the same color as her eyelashes. I just wanted that kind of darkness around the eye to be a little more neutral. Then for the lips, setting a certain color and then setting it to multiply so that I can bring a little bit of darkening as well as some color. And now I'm going in and just making sure that I add in some extra details around the eyes. I wanted to just make sure that that was at the level that I expected it to be, and that it matched the same brush that I was using for the skin. This is where I start deciding, like, okay, time to go back through and make sure that it's all feeling similar. So the eyes get more of like a rough pass now to bring them into line with the skin. And you can see in the eye reflection that we have the shadow from the hair, or I should say the hair blocking the reflection. So now going in and painting in the drop shadow from her hair, the cast shadow on her face. And of course we'll put a little bit of subsurface scattering where the bloom hits. The color of the shadow actually gets tweaked a couple of times just because my mood kind of changes as I'm going through, but it stays more or less in the same range. You can see here that the overall palette for this is fairly neutral. It's not like a really yellowy light with a very purpley blue shadow or any other type of extreme color like that. Which sort of gives it an overall 60s vibe, although I wasn't specifically making sure I targeted that, but I certainly was aware of it sort of as the piece developed. But that sort of where there's not much color temperature changing from light to shadow is very much a hallmark of that era. So it's definitely a thing that's kind of happening here. So now the hair for the bangs and the sort of front lock, it's all done with the exact same palette as the rest of it. And then I'm just making sure that I'm using that brush as effectively as possible to mimic the hair and the shape of the hair, and just try to get some of that, try to make it accurate but also give it that graphic look that's going on. So now we've moved into doing her piercings on her lip, getting some bounce light, or some reflection I should say, since it's metal, and the overall just lighting and rendering on them in general. And then we move into the body. Just like with going from one hair chunk to the next using the same palette, now that we're moving from the face to the body, we're using the same palette. I intended, not in the original sketch, I mean, she's got a couple, I think, sketched in tattoos on her in the original sketch, but I wanted to just have more of them in this. So my thought was to go ahead and just paint her, obviously without the tattoos, and then apply them later, just like you would in real life. You're born without them and you apply them later. It's just a nice way of, it sort of adds to trying to capture it in a realistic way. I added a little bit of red in here, although it gets pretty knocked back to where it's almost non-existent. I just wanted to get a little bit of color variation since it's just this big sort of slab of body. And then of course I try to push some of the depth on it, because as you can see right now it's a bit of a flat shape. It's almost like I'm deliberately just painting local color, but I wasn't really going for just painting local color. It's just she's already so pale. It was kind of working out that way. But you can see here where I start banging in some of the cast shadows, she starts getting some form, and I start rounding out her body a little bit more. Making sure that the freckles are in there, like on her face, across her body. All the girls, I think all the girls in the Pink Hair Girl book have freckles, so the sketch had freckles, so I just carried those over. Other than her general look and feel being my style, which is the Pink Hair Girl's book, and her having freckles and piercings, that's like sort of all that carries over. Obviously the overall palette is quite different. If you can't tell what's changing in this part, I'm going through the face layers, and I'm adding some extra, or I was adding some extra imperfections there just to bring it more in line with how I've got the body kind of rough. So now obviously I'm just in the background doing some background work to bring a little more interest there. I didn't want it to be too much, which is why you could see I started with a little bit of a halo-y glow thing, and then I decided to not do that. There's just basically, it's still just like a flat yellowy mustardy sort of texture, color, but now it's got a little bit of texture to it. And now I'm adding rim light. Again, I didn't want this to be overly fancy rim light. I kind of wanted it to be more like out of the tube rim light, so that it kept a little bit of that opaque graphic look that's kind of going on. I mean, there's certainly some things in this image that are a little on the digital side and are tricks that you can only do digitally, like, you know, the way I did the reflection in the eye. You can hand paint that, but I didn't, right? I put it in as like this big white chunk and then lowered the opacity. But there are certain things like the graphicness of the hair, the type of brush I used for the skin, the way the rim light's applied, that gives it more of an opaque look, like you just painted directly with it. And that's what I wanted to try and keep doing when I was doing this rim light, and it was the look that I wanted to make sure was throughout the whole thing. So we've got the rim light on her skin, the rim light on her eye, and the rim light on the piercings, and then I'm knocking back the rim light on her hair a little bit so that it's just a little less reflective, because how stark it was against the hair made the hair sort of take way too aggressive a position in the piece. I want more of the attention to be drawn to her skin and her eyes. I mean, mostly her eyes, but her skin and her face and her expression, and then her hair secondarily. So now I add an extra bit of shine on her hair just to give it a little bit more dimension and make sure that that's there. Just, you know, adds a little bit more to it. And now some bounce on her hair from her skin, in that back section especially, where it's all just sort of flat. I wanted to make sure that it got a little bit of love there as far as lighting is concerned. Now we move into the tattoos. So basically this is all done. You can see that I turned off the rim light. That's because the rim light is of course going to be on top of the tattoo. Here you can see me quickly jump into using the symmetry tool in order to get some symmetry going, and then I go in and add some things that aren't symmetrical. Now we are doing There's like a little bit of a bat thing. I'm referencing some tattoos online as far as just how a certain style is done, although not at all copying any individual tattoo, because that would be a stupid move. I'm obsessed with all-seeing eyes and lightning bolts, so of course I have to try and squeeze that in some sort of weird way. I very briefly said, of course, the rim light is going to be on top of the tattoos. What I mean there is because the way tattoos work and the level at which they are in your skin, the tattoos still receive a lot of the same lighting effects that your skin does. So that's why if you're looking at a tattoo, let's say on wet skin, you still get that really hard shine across the tattoo, and depending on how you look at a tattoo in like sunlight, depending where the sun is, you almost can't even see the tattoo because you might have a shine running across the skin. So what I try to do is I try to keep some of my brighter lighting effects on top of all the tattoos to deliberately wash them out or obscure them as they would be in real life. You can see that the tattoo artist that she had here was also very considerate of her freckles, as he left a break there in the line just in case one of those freckles ends up being something more. So that's why those layers are turned off here. Those layers will then, of course, get turned back on. They'll be on top of the tattoos, and that will help sell that the tattoos are on her skin and not just like a drawing that was added later. You can have a lot of fun with tattoos on characters by making them not look realistic or make them look really realistic. I tend to try to make them look a little bit more on the realistic side, just to try and ground the image. Since I go for generally a more stylistic look, I try to find opportunities to leverage like lighting or materials or something to try and ground what I do. Tattoos are drawn and they get a duplication and a blur, and then they get all lowered down in opacity so that they look properly faded and they look like they are not completely brand new, super sharp. Then we add a little bit of bounce on the inner hair because her face is receiving a rim light, so then that hair would be the recipient of the bloom from that, the bounce from that skin. This is where I just decided to go in and add a little bit more tattoo work, and then I go back to re-blurring it and re-lowering the opacity real fast. I also, right there you could see I warped the back one a little bit more so that it looked like it was more on the plane. It received a shine going across it in order to sell the skin again. And then I had just a little bit of a brightening at the top, sort of cascading down. And that's really, then I turn it off because I hate it. And that's it. That's the piece for Fuzzball. So here is the original rough sketch that I did way back when, and then here's me updating it with some color and everything. This one was really fun. I really enjoyed doing this, so I hope you guys liked it too. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing, and I'll see you on the next one. And as far as the next ones are concerned, man, do I have a lot of stuff stored up here, so I hope you guys are ready. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me.